Listen, I'm going to tell you what really grinds my gears. All right? It's
me, where's your faith challenge in your current job?
Let me tell you, insurance is a load of dookie, people. It's a load of dookie. Seriously. I feel like if you called up right now to an insurance company and were like, can you tell me about ABA therapy? They'd be like, huh? Hold on. I gotta pull the screen up. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't even know, like, they don't even know what they're insuring. They do not know. And I don't know why
they would be like, what is ABA therapy? Can you please define ABA?
Hold on. I got to look this up on my screen. Do we cover that? Is that a thing? Hey, George, have you ever heard of ABA?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. It's so ridiculous. I just, like, it really
grinds your gears.
It just upsets me. Oh my gosh, client after client after client after client that deserve services and should be getting services are cut off and shortened and not taken care of. And then I have client after client after client that probably in all reality should choose a different type of therapy, and they're just getting more and more and more and more. And it is so frustrating. So let's talk about insurance.
Which insurances are doing that? Like, have you narrowed it down between like, oh, it's more Medicaid and less private?
No,
it's more Blue Cross Blue Shield and Magellan.
Honestly, I haven't. And I was actually talking to another BCBA today about this, and she was talking to me about how many of her notes had been sit back because insurance.
Oh yeah, that's a huge thing that we deal with. Yes.
Yeah, insurance was like, hey, can you redo this part? We don't really understand what this means. Like, what are you trying to get at here? I just feel like insurance looks at it, and you can speak more to this because it's so annoying. They're like, they feel like the only important thing is that clients know how to communicate.
Well, yeah.
Like that's the end all be all. Okay, so you know how to scream no at someone, so you must be okay. Go with God. Like
I told you, I just had this same issue with like just being able to define environments for therapy. Like community outings are not considered therapy. There was one time, okay, so this is my favorite, right? This is something that I loved was I was at a small agency and I was a BT at that point, and I was going to soccer practice, okay?
Oh God.
And yes, I was going to soccer practice. Insurance was not insurance at that point. It was regional center. So regional center is kind of like a Medicaid in California, but not Medicaid. I can't even explain it, but they funded the services. Well, they found out we were going to soccer practice, and oh my gosh, it was like an uproar. A whole audit happened. It was like soccer is not a medically necessary setting.
No, but the social skills that you're learning at soccer are they are necessary for everyday life.
Well, so they were saying that then your supervisor needs to be the one providing the support to the parent, and the parent should be the one implementing. So that's my thing. Marissa, how would you have loved to implement as a parent with a child with special needs? You're going to soccer practice and you're the RBT with the supervisor telling you, hey, you should do this, this, and this with your kid.
No. And honestly, this is going to sound really mean, but like from the lower status, I probably wouldn't want to go with the BCBA or whoever the supervisor is for this agency, because that's not the person that's implementing all the stuff every day with my kid. I want to go with that lady or guy that drops my kid off in the car every day that I talk to and have the relationship with. Right? Like, I don't mind if that person is there, but that's not the person who's doing the implementation of the programming, right? So, like, no, I would have been so agitated. I would have wanted to go with you. I would not have been like, yo, send her supervisor out here.
Yeah.
the supervisor would have shut up and I'd
There's
been
a
like, who are you?
a lot of parents, this is what I learned about California and the different regions I've worked in, is California's educated, so don't mess with them. They will find every which way to get their needs met.
Yeah.
I mean, when COVID happened, there was a riot outside of the doors of the middle school, the elementary school, the high school. They said, we don't care if you've got to wrap your teachers up in bubble wrap. We're dropping our kids off. Shout out to all my teacher friends who did that.
That's a whole nother podcast, okay?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother podcast that we're going to talk about. With that.
Let's go back to insurance. So what have you encountered recently that this just...
So it's not, I mean, I have encountered it recently, but I have encountered this so many times over. So clients like that are really excelling. So let's say you have a client who comes in, they have no social skills, they have no communication skills. They're just like going crazy all the time, right? And the family's like, I don't know what to do. So you put them on a program, right? We work really hard. We have this awesome conversation, the BCBA and the family, about what they need. We begin to implement the program and they start making progress rapidly. Not like someone who's like on the program, like every, their program doesn't change, but every couple of months. I'm talking about clients who their programming is changing weekly. Like they're just going through, right? And they start making progress so rapidly that insurance says, oh, wow, this client has made so much progress. They must not need the amount of hours that we're giving. So let's say you're giving 35 hours a week. They're going full time to therapy. We're going to cut them in half. But what happens is now we have a client who was progressing rapidly. So in my opinion, this is my humble opinion as a parent. Let's be very clear about this. My opinion as a parent is if you're choosing therapy, ABA, OT, PT, speech, whatever the therapy is, the point of therapy is so that I can get my kids to a place where they can attend in the real world, right? School, right? So for a lot of parents who have high needs children or maybe high functioning autism, autism 1, they are going to send their kids to ABA therapy, speech, all these things, right? So that by the time they have had X amount of practice, they are able to go to school. And maybe they attend therapy twice a week after school, maybe 5 days a week after school, whatever they need. But the goal is to get them in school. The problem is whenever you start going to therapy full time and a client is super close to being ready to go to school, and then insurance is like, oh, no, let's knock them down to halftime. And then all of a sudden I start seeing this client and they're regressing. We used to be potty trained. We're not really potty trained anymore. We used to, say 130 words every 2 hours, right? Or manding, tacting, right? They're doing all these communication skills, and now all of a sudden they're coming halftime and they're regressing. Well, the other half of the time they're going to either a daycare or staying at home. And the reality is, especially I feel like whenever I see clients who go to daycare, it's worse because their caregivers don't have the funding, the education, or the ability to continue what they need to continue, especially when it comes to potty training. We all know for kids on the spectrum, potty training is like a huge deal, right? Regression can happen really quickly whenever you're in a class of 23 kids, 15 kids, and no one's really paying attention to that, your tell sign, right? And then all of a sudden I start seeing this kid in therapy and they're regressing. They're not doing half of what they were doing before. Now all of a sudden this kid that was ready to go to school in the fall, they're not ready to go to school anymore. And
Yeah.
then you have parents who are like freaking out, right? Because we don't have like advocates, at least here in Oklahoma. Do they have that in California?
Yeah, there's a lot of advocates.
Okay.
A
So
lot.
in Oklahoma, if you want an advocate, you're going to pay privately for an advocate. Your insurance isn't going to cover you to have an advocate to help you navigate what this system looks like.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm saying is that it's just a lack of education of understanding the level of care that can be provided to their child once they've been approved for services, for ABA services. It's really sad because I've seen it like now across multiple states, just how different and like less progressive it is in the central part of the US. Yeah.
Why is that though? Because I look into, like, if you look into ABA therapy particularly, right? It's very, very, very heavily used in areas like Florida and California, right? What
Yes.
is it with the middle states? Like, what is the deal? Why do we not have advocates? Like,
Because
what?
it's the wild, wild west. That's how I feel.
That is how it feels.
That's literally how I feel.
I mean, whenever I got into not ABA, but I got into education originally, right? Whenever I got into education, it was because I was looking for help and I couldn't find any help. Like, my
Yeah.
pediatrician was like, hey, there's this place called the Sunshine Center. And I call the Sunshine Center and they're like, well, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. I don't know. Like, I didn't go to school for, like, you're giving me the rundown of what we could do. How am I supposed to know what to pick?
Right. Yeah,
All
it's
I
just a
know,
lack of information. And then there's no I think like also is that I got used to like having resources that I would give to families when I was working in California. Like there was an endless amount of like equestrian therapy that was covered through the state.
yes.
Or like swim therapy that was covered through the state. And it just is not necessarily provided across these states, which is really sad because there's so much out there. But what's really hard is not every family can move to a state where the base salary is $150,000 a year.
Well, and I'm like, let's be honest. Like, if I'm going to be honest, you and I have had this conversation a million times. I have no desire to ever live in California. I lived in California
Right.
as a kid. I have no desire to move back there. I'm good. I moved from Colorado, right? I was born in Colorado. I lived there when the twins were little. We lived there,
I heard services in Colorado are even more difficult to
which is
attain.
crazy. You know what I mean? Like, there are, like, I shouldn't have to move, and it's crazy. There are, honestly, I really, 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 we need to have one of my really good friends come on here because she was the very first special education teacher that I ever worked with. And let me tell you something, if I did not have that woman, her name is Becky Rogalski. I'm just going to shout her out. Becky, you're the bomb. If I did not have her when my kids started school, I don't know where we would be, because when my kids started at their school, and they went to a very nice, it was not your average elementary school. It was a charter school. And when my kids started in there, they had a ton of kids on IEPs and all kinds of things, and they had one para for the entire school. If it had not been for Becky Rogalski sitting down with me and highlighting, I mean, she took that IEP and she was like, you're going to say this, this, and this. This is what you're going to do. She took the parent, the book, you know, they give you a little booklet as a parent, like, here's your parent rights. She highlighted that thing. And let me tell you something. I walked into that meeting and I shook that principal's world. I would love to have him on too. But I mean, I went in with a notebook and I was like, I said everything she said to say. And guess what? By the end of that school year, I think they had 3 paras and a lead of special education with their
That's
own room
awesome.
at the end of the school year. But
Yeah.
had I not come along through that school,
Yeah.
and had I not met Becky Rogalski, like, where would that school be today? Would they even have that program? It took one parent who was like, these are the laws and you guys better pull it together for them to be like, oh. Because what I also found in education is a lot of people in education don't even know their own laws and rules.
Right. Right. And I also think now that we've like jumped into multiple topics, like there's just not enough people like Becky that is able to share their knowledge across like the state. Does that make sense? So there's like one Becky that's covering northern Oklahoma, and people in southern Oklahoma need that same additional help.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I was offered that teaching job, one of my questions as the special education resource teacher, and my friends are going to laugh when they hear this, is I said, do the parents bring their lawyers when they go to these IEP meetings?
Shut up. Shut up.
The vice principal stopped in her tracks and looked at me and goes, what have you experienced? And I was like, we don't discuss it. I'm from a state where you better have your lawyer on speed dial.
I mean, I have a really good friend who's from California, and she has so many times been like, hey, can I hire you? Like, I'm going to hire you because I don't know how to navigate the school system here. And you seem to know a lot about the school system. And I'm like,
Well, the Disabilities Act is across the whole United States. It's not just a one thing across one state. So I think that when you don't educate yourself on the Disability Act, then you'll get taken advantage of as a parent. Something that I really did in my practice was I could recognize when a school was trying to take advantage of a parent, and I would nudge my parent like, you need to find somebody who specializes in IEPs, who specializes in understanding school advocacy, and they're out there. A friend of mine is an IEP coach, and she is out of California, but she knows the law, and she's saying that the law goes across multiple states. So whatever's written in that IEP document, that's a document that's shared between you and the school, and you guys agree together. It's not like it's one-sided where it's just the school or it's one-sided to the parents' preferences.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell parents whenever they ask me about IEPs, and I have a lot of friends and just people that I talk to about their kid being on IEPs, and they're like, what's the number one thing you look for when you start to read an IEP? I'm like, if your IEP says student will, this is not tailored to your child. It better say, like, whatever your child's name is, Ellie will blah, 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 blah. And it better be a reasonable, reachable, tangible goal, not just some blanketed,
right,
we'll know 14 shapes within 3 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've seen some wild IEPs that I'm like, why, and my friend that is a BCBA, she called me about her kid's IEP, because that's not, IEP is not the same thing. And she's like, wants to read it line for line. And I'm like, take out this, put in this, ask them about this, right? Like, you are your kid's advocate. And I think like this conversation more than anything is just about resources, right? Like,
yeah,
regardless of where your kid is, if they're in school, if they're in therapy, whatever, like, you're their advocate. We'll say this 700,000 times, and you have a right to be like, I don't like that. I want a meeting. Hey, I have a question about this. Like, and I think that's where people often, like, that's why they're not educated, is because they're afraid to ask. Like, they don't seem like they're dumb or don't understand what's going on. And so they're afraid to ask the question. But in reality, like, you got to ask the question and get the information and maybe do a little digging to be able to protect your kid. And just like I was talking about before, like with insurance, right? There are ways, like if insurance says, oh, we're going to cut your kid to 50% of the time, and then you start seeing regression, there are steps that we can take, right? It's going to take some
to go
time.
back and ask for more services. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
see it all the time too. Like what I notice is that speech is something that's cut off like this
oh my gosh,
so
yes.
fast. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? And I never understood that. And I don't know if it's like because, like I said, uh, they have maybe met their goals or whatever with that specific speech pathologist in the past. And they probably, as a family, need to find a new speech pathologist because I think that that service doesn't just go away because you graduated from that that program or whatever. I think that if you went back to your pediatrician and said, hey, I'm noticing these other things, like your pediatrician should be able to say, okay, I'm going to give you a referral for speech, but don't go to the same speech pathologist.
Yeah, well, and I back to that conversation of like kids going through therapies and then going to school. I know a thing here in Oklahoma because I dealt with this with my own son, right? He went to speech at the Sunshine Center. And then he graduated from speech there. So what did I do? Oh, I put him in school. Guess what is in schools and available to you as a parent? Speech. He saw a speech path, I think, for at first 5 days a week, right? And then he graduated, but he didn't graduate from that program until he was like in 4th grade, right? But my insurance was like, hey, why are we paying for this when he can get it for free at the school? I'm not going to be paying for it, right? So, like, it's also, again, educating yourself. These services are available to you. And that's why I think a lot of times parents are gun shy, especially parents of kids on the spectrum, are gun shy to send their kids to school. Shout out to my teacher friends who are phenomenal working in the school system because there are a lot of really, really great sped teachers. Seriously.
And I have a few of those too, like 10-year
Yeah,
teachers that have
yeah,
been in there.
great. They're
Yeah.
amazing. I know a lot of really great sped teachers, and they're educated. They know what they're talking about, and they will work with you through thick and thin. It's crazy the time and effort they will put into it, but parents are gun shy to send their kids to school, and so they want to keep them in therapy. And that's, I think, in my personal opinion, the hardest part about therapy is deciding when, like, what's the line here? Like, when does therapy start intruding on like them progressing, right?
Mhm.
Because we can sit our kids in therapy for years and years and years full time and then never walk into a school. But then whenever services shut off, right, when insurance says, you've seen all you can see, and then they shut off, and then we have to, oh, surprise, Jordan, today, for the first time in the 6th grade, you're going to go to school. Terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. But I don't know, like, I don't think it's talked about enough. It's not talked to parents enough about, like, what's the line? When do we start introducing them to school? What's the ability? A lot of parents think you have to go to school full time. Well, that's not necessarily the truth either, right?
Right.
So, like, it's hard. A lot of people just depend on insurance to tell them what they can and cannot do.
Right.
And
And we're
so much deeper.
insurance is more of a medical reference. Like they give medical advice, not education advice. Something that I experienced in California was we wanted to provide services in the school setting. And at that point, California had Medicaid and there's no more regional center. Regional center was for some clients, it depended on their age, and then they had private insurance who was covering the services. And if the kid was going to school and the parent requested for their BT to go to school with them, it was you paid privately because that was not covered for medical insurance or through medical insurance. And so but parents were requesting because they couldn't find the right paraprofessional to cover for their kid being in the classroom. And they knew that BTs had the proper training in regards to behavior management, not necessarily education. And so a lot of school care was either private pay or parents really fighting for their medical insurance to cover the cost, or the school to hire that BT as their child's paraprofessional.
Yeah. And honestly, we can get into this. It can go pretty deep because I've worked in multifaceted areas from the school system to BT, now an ABA. And BT here is almost kind of a joke because they don't want them like interfering with the classroom.
Right.
So now they're looking at putting RBTs right into a classroom. A lot of parents are paying privately for an RBT to come into the classroom to help their child because they have these behavioral therapists that will come into the classroom, but the school's like, no, we don't want them interfering, and they need more intervention for their child because their child's missing out. It's such a
Yeah. It's
honestly,
interesting how they don't overlap, but there's parts of ABA and parts of school that do overlap, but one doesn't want to touch the other and the other doesn't want to touch the other. And it's so interesting because then I feel like what happens and who's affected primarily are the kids.
Yeah.
Like then there's a huge gap. Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then honestly, if I look at it and I like really sit back and like try to analyze it, I always think of it as like it's just so new, right? Like all these different types of therapy, all these different types of ways to address things that are going on with our kids that have special needs are all fairly new, honestly,
Right.
to the world around us. And so like learning to navigate, and you're right, like they, for whatever reason, like schools don't want to like, I don't want to say intermingle, but they just like, they don't want to have to change. And then ABA doesn't want to have to change. And so it's just like this battle all the time between
Right.
the two. And it's really hard because we as parents are just trying to advocate for our kids, man.
Yeah. 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 You want the best, you want to address the issue, which is, okay, my kid needs services and I'm trying to give them the best services and education that they deserve. And the variables are I'm limited in my medical insurance, and then school is limiting me with the resources that they have to make my son or daughter successful in that setting.
Yeah. Yeah. And schools, honestly, they're trained to whatever behavioral health plan the district buys, right? To train their employees. So, like conscious discipline, there's a bunch of different ones, but right. So, whatever the one is that the district says, hey, this is going to be the one that
Right.
we're going to teach. And then we're like stuck with this, with when in reality, like when we're talking about our clients on the spectrum, what might work better for them is a different type of behavioral intervention plan, but this is the only one that the school has purchased, so it's the one that they live by. And we know in therapy that there's so many different ways to address this issue, and I got to pick the one that connects best with the kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I agree.
It's a wild world out here for us.
Okay, so let's talk about 3 key points that we can give the parents and families from our conversation.
Yeah.
We can do number 1, insurance. I would really look into your coverage. I would talk to the care manager that is in charge of your coverage specific to ABA, and asking those questions like how long can services be, what qualifies my son or daughter to be qualified for services, how do services get cut off, how do services continue, what does long-term care look like, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 2.
You want to talk about education?
Yeah, that's where I was going. I was like, are you going to go there with me?
Yeah.
Education. First of all, educate yourself on what your rights are as a parent, right? So get that parent handbook, read through it, look at the things that apply to you, talk to your kids' IEP director, right? Whoever it is that's over their IEP, or let's say your kid's on a 504. Your kid's on a 504, you haven't gotten that IEP yet. Talk to them, ask them 750 questions, read through that thing, ask them to explain, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like, what is the goal? How does this goal attain to my life, right? Because why are we having goals that aren't applicable to our everyday life, right? Ask the questions that you want to know and don't be shy about it. And find out what you need to do to, let's say you can't get them on an IEP yet, find out what you need to do. Call the school, call the district, ask the questions.
Yes.
Last.
And I think last should be do your own research. Like really dig in and like find those extra resources as far as maybe an advocate being in your city or even joining a Facebook group that is in the city or who've experienced these different things and asking those questions because other people are on the same walk and they have maybe been on the walk a little longer than you have, and they will give you guys advice.
Yes.
I think a lot of where I was in California, a lot of the parents were on groups and they recognized that there was a lot of people who walked ahead of them. And so the resources that they were getting were people that walk way ahead of them.
Listen, when my kids were little and I started this journey, that is where I started. I mean, and literally I have two people that I still talk to them to this day. One of them lived in Australia. The other one lived in Maryland. But they had walked this walk ahead of me and they were like, hey girl, we're going to help you out. Like, you have to find those people, and they may not be people in your community or they may be, but the internet has opened a lot of doors for parents, regardless of where you are. If you have an atypical kid and whatever, neurotypical, it does not matter. Like, the internet is a huge resource for you. Ask the questions.
Yes.
And if you're afraid,
do your research. Yes.
If you're afraid, ask them anonymously.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks for hanging out with us today, guys. We hope that this helped a little bit. We can't wait to see you again next time.
All right.